Now we're going to look at facilitating learning. How do we facilitate other people to learn? Sometimes this might be termed, you might think of this as being teaching. But actually, I prefer the idea of how do you facilitate somebody else learning? This guy, he is appointed as a leader above other people. He has gifts. He has developed a whole bunch of skills. And yet, without these followers, he's failed. Now, you could argue that this lady here, she is a teacher. She has got natural abilities. She's developed further capacity. But if she doesn't have participants who are actually learning from her, then actually she's just wasting her time. We need to recognize that until followers are actually following us, learners are actually learning, then we haven't actually taught anything. We haven't actually led anybody. So it's not just about who we are, it's who we are in the context of other people who are then coming with us. Let's think a little bit about learning. I do like this idea, and so I'm gonna hit it again. You haven't taught anything until the other person has learnt something. Does that make sense? In fact, you only know if what you did was success when their behavior or attitude changes. Okay, learning. I'd like you to think of something that you are really good at. Something that you are proud in your ability. Then I want you to think about, how did you become good at it? Okay, think of something that you are really proud of. How do you know that you can be proud of it? Think of something that you tried to learn, but it didn't go well. Who do you think is to blame? And finally, think of something that you are good at now, but you really didn't want to learn it at the time. And to go with that, what kept you motivated? Now, I have a friend who has asked these exact questions all over the world to hundreds of people and has come back with a bunch of answers. So hopefully you've had a chance to think about them and how you would answer them. And now we'll see some of the common themes that have come through when he has asked these questions around the world. So, if I can get it working, there we go. So the first question was, how did you become good at your thing? And people tend to answer something along the lines of, well, I built on a skill that I already had. Or they'll say, I chose to make it a priority and I really focused on it. Or maybe they would say, practice, practice, practice. That's what I did. I reflected on it, say other people. When we ask the question, well, how do you know that you can really be proud of it? Some people will say, oh, well, it's to do with the affirmation of others. Or maybe there is some sort of objective evidence. Some people will then look more reflectively and say, well, my confidence grew, or I had personal satisfaction in what I was doing. Thirdly, the third question, who might be to blame when it didn't go as you were planning? People would tend to say, well, it's probably a lack of practice, or I failed to prioritize it, or a lack of my own confidence. But mostly people would ultimately say, yes, I am to blame for it not going right. And to the fourth question about what kept you motivated, people would say, I had some sort of determination that I was not going to fail. Or maybe they feared the negative consequences of failure. Or other people encouraged them. Or maybe it was that they saw small victories and that helped them to keep going. So, in amongst these various different answers, there are a bunch of themes that come through. Some is the fact that if you want to get good at something, you have to do it. There has to be elements of practice going on in there. There has to also be some degree of reviewing and checking. How did it go? Kind of self-feedback. There also needs to be elements of affirmation and encouragement. There needs to be this feedback, not just kind of like internalized, but also in a sort of externally processable way where you can see some sort of results or rewards. The reflection process needs to be heavily focused on learning from mistakes rather than just running away from them. And there's an element of teaching it to other people helps to then solidify it in ourselves. So, from all of these answers and from these themes, what comes out are 5 factors of learning. And it starts off with us wanting to learn. If we want to learn, then there is a good chance that we're going to get somewhere. So, question is going to be for, if you're thinking about facilitating a session, you're trying to help people to learn, to grow, you have to think, what do they want to learn? Not just what do you want to teach, but what do they want to learn? Or maybe as the leader, you're thinking about how to help your staff to grow. It's not just about what you think they need. It's also, you need to think about what is it that they want to learn. And of course, as the facilitator, you should also be thinking, what do you want to learn in this process? It is entirely possible to not think about this. But actually, a good facilitator also should be thinking through, what am I hoping to get out of this? It's not just a neutral thing that you teach. There is something that you gain from it as well. And of course, you can then think, well, all right, if their wanting to learn is not very strong, can I do things to increase their desire? Can I encourage them? Can I enthuse them? Can I show them the benefits of learning so that they want to learn? Sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes there also needs to be a need to learn. And it may be that they can see some sort of end result and they know, if I learn this, then it will take me that next step. It will open that door. It will solve that problem. There needs to be some end point that they can point to. And it may be that you as the facilitator can think about converting that need into a want. They need to get the bit of paper at the end. Okay, but surely it's more than that. Surely they want to grow some new skill so that they don't just have a piece of paper to hang on the wall or put in the file, but they can actually now do something different that they couldn't do before. Are there things that you as the facilitator can do to try and shift the need, which can be very powerful? Can you shift that into a want, which is possibly even more powerful? Okay, third factor of learning is this idea that we learn by doing. If we just try and learn theoretically by watching a video, by reading a book, it has some benefit, but it doesn't really help us to learn because we haven't really done much in terms of putting it into practice. So I would often encourage people, just do something. Even if it's a role play in the classroom, just do something, because as soon as you start doing, it starts putting it into your head a little bit. You have a chance to try it out, to see how it works. And if it works and you think, yeah, that seemed to be successful, do it again. Keep doing it again. If, of course, you find that something doesn't work, well, do it differently. Don't just give up. And by encouraging these sort of basic principles in our teaching sessions or, in our facilitated sessions, we can help people to learn more effectively. So that's learning by doing. Of course, how can you do this? There's lots of ways you can. I've already talked about it. Could be role playing. It can be just singing it rather than just reading it. It can be acting it out. It could be drawing a picture about the thing that you've just learned. It could be making a model. It could be making a thing. It could be trying to demonstrate it to somebody else. It could be teaching it to somebody else. All of these things, even simple things like just holding a discussion or writing it down, describing it, these kind of things will start to put it into your mind, because you have a chance to start reflecting on it, to start dwelling on it, and it starts to sink into you a little bit. But it's not enough. Having done a bit of learning by doing, of course, it can be done in a worked through process where maybe first of all you do it and they just simply watch it. Then the next stage is you try and do it together. Then, ideally, you might guide them whilst they do it, and then eventually they are doing it and you are just giving them some feedback so that eventually they can walk out of the classroom and they can do it confidently. These are the sort of things that you can do to try and help the doing process become more and more real for them. And as well as trying to do this, I don't know, in a role play, well, that's fine. But can you do it in a way that engages as many senses as possible, so that you're engaging their sound, you're talking to them? Could you also play a video so that you've got a visual element in there as well, a sight, maybe touch? Maybe when they're doing their role play, you actually sit them at a desk or a table, and they're then starting to engage touch elements in there as well. Maybe even smell and taste could be engaged, because the more senses that you bring in to your facilitated session, the more likely it is that it'll stick in their head. Because whilst they're doing it, what you're wanting them to do is to make sense of it, to feel inside. It's not a feeling, but it's a thought process that allows them to understand what they're getting at. We have here a plate of dal bhat, and we want that dal bhat to be converted into energy. Well, what is the process by which dal bhat is converted into energy that can climb us up mountains? There's a digestive process. And that's exactly what we need to bring into our facilitated sessions. That we've got the raw materials there on the table, in the textbook, in the lesson, in the lecture that they've just listened to. They've got that. They've started to put it into practice, but it's still kind of theoretical. It's still inside a classroom. Making sense of it is a bit like the digestion, which will turn it into something which is really useful for them outside of the classroom. So it's about turning the information that they have into knowledge that can actually be used. And this kind of digestion, this kind of reflective process, it takes time. It's not something that can be done instantly. So, we can do things to help make that time. If you are having a facilitated session that lasts over several days, you can give them something to work on one day, reflect on it overnight, and then the next day take it the next stage. If you don't have multiple days, maybe you have to do everything in just a few hours, put a tea break in there. Because in that break, in that 5 minutes, even if they start talking to other people and getting a cup of tea and having a biscuit and so on, during that time, it gives the brain a little bit of time to digest what it has been listening to and to turn the information into knowledge which can be useful. But it takes time. You can't do the digesting whilst there's more new food being piled on. So, we need to give space for this making sense phase. And if we try to do it all in the classroom, it can be a bit difficult to imagine, well, how's that going to work in real life? So whenever possible, use role plays, use things which help them to bridge that gap between this kind of theoretical classroom environment that they are currently in. You want them to take this knowledge and use it when they get back into their office. And so you've got to do things that help them to picture their office and to picture this thing that they're currently looking at and say, well, how does this work in your office? Discuss that with your neighbor. So, you're forcing them to really engage. Okay, I'm not actually in my office. I'm not going to be there until Monday, but I can still talk about it with somebody else. And it's all about making sense and helping them to really get it. So, what can you do to make space and time for that? Well, use discussion time, because that is both using the brain engaging, but for half of discussion time, they're listening. And so you've got, there's time for that making sense to go on. As I said, use the tea breaks, as well as giving them a tea break and saying, okay, you've got 15 minutes to get yourself a cup of tea and a biscuit. You can also leave them with a question and say, oh, whilst you're getting your tea and biscuits, why don't you discuss this question with some of your colleagues? Question up on the board. Gives them something to do during their tea break. Definitely get them to be thinking, how are you going to apply this when you get back to your work situation? And constantly you should be trying to make links between the theory of what you're talking about and the practice that they will find when they get back into their working environment. And something that you can do to keep on making the links between the different things that you're talking about is to every once in a while do a little review. Oh, this is what we talked about yesterday. Here's how we're now going to put that into practice. Or, between our different sessions, sometimes I would give, up to half an hour of this is what we did last time we met. Because it just gives people another chance to think about it, to dwell on it, to make sense of it. And then, as well as building in that need to learn, the wanting to learn, and then actually helping them to put it into some sort of practice that as they're actually doing it and allowing time for them to make sense of it, there then needs to be a feedback process where they are learning through feedback. Now, you know about indicators and in plans, but how about other kinds of indicators? Like there's a lot of indicators here on the dashboard of this aeroplane as these two pilots are flying along. If they fail to look at the indicators as to where they are, how high they are, how steep they're climbing or descending, how much fuel they have, how fast they are flying, what other planes are in the air around them. If they fail to look at these indicators, they're not going to learn very much. They're much more likely to have a big accident. We have to recognize that these 5 factors of learning, they build on one another, and help to grow the learning experience. And it does culminate in this feeding back. Did it work? If it worked, do it again. If it didn't work, do something different. Modify, change it, have another go. So I would reiterate, if you're wanting to build the capacity of people on your team, then you have to help them want to learn. You've got to help them see the benefits of learning and growing. You have to help them see the need to learn. And sometimes that could be a little bit to do with consequences. If you fail to grow, this is what's going to happen. You've got to help them put things into practice as quickly as possible in a safe way, which probably is about delegation. Then you've got to provide enough space and encouragement that they can reflect on what they have done. And we know good delegation involves a whole lot of feedback going on. So that they can reflect on it and see, how is this working? How does this fit in these other situations? Do I like this? Is it making sense for me? And finally, this thing of there has to be good, solid feedback at all stages of what works, what does not work. Because through knowing that, they will be able to move forward and be able to learn through the process. And ultimately, as well as just growing in themselves, they also become more useful on your staff as part of your team.